The silence in my workshop has a different quality now. It's not the quiet of concentration, the hushed reverence of a space where something is being born from raw material. This is the silence of a tomb. Dust motes, once fellow travelers in shafts of morning light, now feel like ash settling on a grave. My hands resting on the worn oak of my workbench are a map of my life. The nicks and scars are tiny valleys. The calluses are mountain ranges forged by 60 years of planing, chiseling, and carving. They are slow now, these hands. They protest in the mornings with a dull ache that wasn't there a decade ago. But they still work. They remember. People used to say, "If it's from your shop, it'll outlive us all." It wasn't just a compliment, it was a statement of fact. I built legacies. A dining table that would witness 1,000 family meals, a rocking chair that would soothe generations of infants, a bookshelf that would hold the collective wisdom and folly of a household. I wasn't just making furniture. I was building the silent, sturdy stages upon which lives were performed. My son, the boy who used to hide under this very bench, surrounded by the sweet smell of cedar shavings, making forts out of scrap wood, didn't see it that way. His name is my son. I find it hard to use his name now. It feels like a label on an empty box. He went away to college and came back speaking a new language, one made of slick, hollow words. Scaling, branding, automation. He'd stand right here in this sanctuary of sawdust and soul and tell me I was leaving money on the table. "Dad, you're wasting your time carving chairs one by one," he'd say, his voice brimming with the unshakable confidence of the young, who have read all the manuals but have never felt the wood. "Son," I'd say, my voice low and steady as the hum of a well-tuned lathe. "When you make something with your hands, it keeps you honest. The wood tells you the truth. You can't lie to it, and it won't lie for you." He would just smile. That smile. It was the most painful part. It wasn't condescending, not exactly. It was a smile of genuine, pitying affection. The kind of smile you give a beloved old dog who still chases his tail, unaware that the world has moved on to more sophisticated amusements. He thought he was smarter than me. He thought my world of tangible truth was smaller than his world of digital possibility. When I turned 75, my body began to send me invoices for a lifetime of labor. A stiffness in my back that wouldn't loosen. A tremor in my left hand that made fine detail work a battle of will versus flesh. He saw his opening. He came to me, all earnest concern and filial duty. "Dad, let me take over the business," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "You've done enough. Let me handle the stress. You can just relax, put your feet up." Pride bloomed in my chest, a warm, fragile flower. I saw it then, a passing of the torch. Not of the business, not really, but of the name, Ellis. He would learn. He would come to understand the wood, the slow, patient truth of it. He would fail, perhaps,
and in failing he would learn more than any business school could ever teach him. I saw a future where he would come to me, humbled, and ask how to reinforce a mortise and tenon joint, and I would show him. The circle, unbroken. I was a fool. I signed the papers he put in front of me. My vision wasn't what it used to be, and the legal jargon was a dense, thorny hedge. I trusted the hand that held the pen, the eyes that watched me sign. My son's eyes. The first sign was the silence. The phone, once a sporadic but welcome interruption, with a customer asking about a refinishing job or a neighbor recommending a good source for walnut, stopped ringing. My son told me he was streamlining communications, that all calls were going to a new central office. I believed him. Then, one afternoon, a former customer, Mrs. Gable, came by the shop, her face pinched with confusion. She held out her tablet, showing me a sleek, glossy website. Ellis Fine Furniture Company, it screamed in bold, modern typeface. Beneath it was a picture of me, taken a good 15 years ago, leaning over a half-finished chair with a mallet in my hand. The caption read, "Handcrafted by a master craftsman, a legacy of quality." Mrs. Gable said, "I ordered the sideboard, Arthur," her fingers stabbing at the screen. "It said it was made by you, but it arrived in a flat-pack box. It's particle board with a veneer. The drawer fell off when I tried to open it."
The heat of a shame I hadn't earned rushed to my face. I took the tablet, my thumb leaving a smudge on the polished screen. I scrolled. There were my chairs, my tables, my cabinets, or perfect, soulless photographs of them. But they weren't mine. They were ghosts, replicas mass-produced in some anonymous factory overseas. And my name was stamped on every one of them. My signature was even forged at the bottom of the certificate of authenticity. He hadn't wanted my shop. He hadn't wanted to learn my craft. He had wanted my name, my reputation, the 60 years of honest sweat I had poured into this trade. He had bottled it, diluted it, and was selling it by the gallon. I confronted him. I called him, my voice trembling with a hurt so profound it felt like a physical wound. "It's just business, Dad," he said, his voice cool, distant, as if he were reading from a script. "This is the modern world. Nobody wants to wait 6 months for a chair. They want the story. They want the aesthetic. We're selling the idea of craftsmanship. It's more scalable." "You're selling a lie," I roared, the sound alien in my quiet house. "You're using my face to sell garbage. You're making a mockery of everything I am." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sounds of a keyboard clicking. "You don't understand the modern world," he said, and the finality in his tone was like a bolt being thrown on a heavy door. "It's complicated. Just let me handle this, okay? Don't worry about it." He stopped answering my calls after that. When I persisted, his secretary would politely but firmly tell me he was in a meeting or out of town. My son, the boy I taught to throw a baseball, had built a corporate moat around himself and pulled up the drawbridge, leaving me on the outside, shouting at the walls. For 2 years, I was a ghost in my own life. I'd still go to the workshop, but I couldn't bring myself to build. What was the point? My name was no longer mine. It was a brand, a logo on a shipping container full of disappointment. I'd sit and stare at my tools, each one an extension of my own hands, and feel a grief so heavy it seemed to press the air from my lungs. I was a living forgery.
my authentic life used to authenticate a cheap copy. He wasn't just stealing my business, he was erasing my meaning. The anger was the first wave, a hot, cleansing fire that made my old heart pound a dangerous, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I drafted letters, furious, sprawling screeds, filled with words like betrayal and theft. I never sent them. What good would it do? He had the law, the paperwork, the momentum of his sleek, hollow world. After the anger came the cold, a deep, permeating chill of powerlessness. I was 81 years old. I was a relic, a dinosaur watching the meteor streak across the sky. He was right. I didn't understand his world. I didn't understand how truth could be so flexible, how a man's life's work could be reduced to a marketing asset. I became a prisoner in my own home. The walls lined with the real, solid proof of my existence. A cherrywood bookshelf I'd built from my wife. A maple desk that had seen me through 1,000 designs. They were my accusers every day. They whispered, "We are real. What he is doing is not." I took to walking. Long, aimless walks through the town that had watched me grow from an apprentice to a master. I'd see a truck go by, white and gleaming, with Ellis Fine Furniture Co. emblazoned on the side in that modern, soulless script. It was like seeing my own tombstone driven past me. People would nod, but their smiles were different now, pitying. They knew. They all knew. I was no longer the man in the ad. I was the ghost he left behind. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the call came. The voice on the other end was young, bright, and intelligent. "Mr. Ellis, my name is Clara Thorne. I'm a features writer with the Chronicle. I'm doing a piece on family legacy businesses, those passed down through generations. I was hoping I could speak with you. Your son's company is such a remarkable success story of traditional values meeting modern commerce." The phone felt slick in my hand. The words "remarkable success story" were like shards of glass in my ear. I almost hung up. I almost unleashed 2 years of pent-up bitterness down the line at this innocent, ignorant woman. But then, a strange calm settled over me. It was the same calm that descends when I'm about to make the final, critical cut on a piece of rare, figured wood. The mind clears. The breath steadies. The hands know what to do. This was it. The wood was presenting its truth. It was my turn to listen. "Of course," I said, my voice surprisingly even. "I'd be happy to speak with you. Why don't you come to the workshop? That's where the real story is." When she arrived, she was exactly as her voice had suggested. Sharp, professional, with a recorder in her hand and a keen look in her eye. She looked around my silent workshop, taking in the dormant machinery, the layers of dust, the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "It's quieter than I expected," she remarked, a faint line of confusion appearing between her brows. "The work moved," I said, simply. "Would you like to see?" I didn't wait for an answer. I began the tour. But it wasn't the tour she was expecting. I showed her my empty bench. I held up my hands, turning them over so she could see the topography of a lifetime of labor. "This callus," I said,
pointing to a thick pad on the inside of my right thumb. I got that from hand planing a 20-foot oak board for a library desk in 1987. This little scar here, I indicated a white line near my index finger. A chisel slipped when I was working on a wedding gift from my wife. She was angry about the blood on the maple. I spoke quietly, patiently. I was not a bitter old man. I was an archivist, a historian of my own ruin. Then I opened a drawer and took out the catalogs my son had sent me, perhaps as a cruel joke, or perhaps as a final, twisted form of validation. I showed her the glossy photos next to the invoices for container shipments from overseas. I showed her the real, faded, handwritten receipts from my local hardwood supplier, with their specific notes on grain and figure next to the mass-produced barcodes on his packing slips. Finally, I showed her the certificate of authenticity from his company, with my signature forged at the bottom. I laid one of my real old invoices next to it. The difference was a canyon. His was a sloppy imitation, all flourish and no foundation, like a man trying to copy a language he doesn't understand. "He's selling the story of this," I said, gesturing to the dusty, silent workshop, the tools, my hands. "But he's selling that." I pointed to the catalog photo of a perfect, soulless chair. "He's not scaling a business. He's scaling a lie. And my name is the vehicle for it." Clara Thorne stopped her recorder. She looked from my face to my hands to the evidence laid out before her like a courtroom exhibit. The professional curiosity in her eyes had been replaced by something else. A deep, sober understanding. A flicker of outrage on my behalf. "Mr. Ellis," she said softly, "I think I'm writing the wrong story." I just nodded. The truth is always the right story. She left an hour later, her notebook full, her expression grimly determined. I stood at the door of my workshop, the autumn wind biting at my cheeks. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel the cold. I felt the warm, steady glow of the forge. The revenge wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the craftsmanship. I had just built my most important piece. I had built the truth, and I had handed the tool to someone who knew how to wield it. The weight was the hardest part. The space between the act and the consequence. I went about my days, the familiar routines of an old man, the morning coffee, the slow walk, the afternoon in the chair with a book I couldn't concentrate on. But beneath the surface, a current was flowing. I had thrown a stone into the dark water of my son's world, and I was waiting for the ripples to reach shore. They came on a Tuesday. A text message from my son, a single, explosive line. "What did you do?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I had already bought a copy of the Chronicle. The article wasn't on the business page. It was on the front page. The headline was a masterstroke, a perfect, sharp chisel blow. The face behind the fake craftsmanship. Beneath it was the photo Clara Thorne had taken of me in my workshop, my weathered hands resting on a stack of my son's imported catalogs. The contrast was devastating. I read it slowly, savoring each word like a fine wine. It was all there, my story, my words, the empty workshop, the calloused hands, the forged signature, the particle board masquerading as heirloom quality.
She had woven my quiet testimony with damning financial records she'd dug up, showing the staggering markup on the imported goods. She had quotes from satisfied customers from the company's website, juxtaposed with interviews she'd tracked down with real people, like Mrs. Gable, their voices trembling with a sense of personal violation.
It was a perfect storm of public shaming. The article didn't just accuse, it grieved. It mourned the loss of something real in a world increasingly comfortable with the counterfeit. My phone began to ring. It was a cacophony of sound I hadn't heard in years. Old friends, former customers, even a reporter from a national news network. I let it ring. I sat in my chair, the newspaper spread on my lap, and watched the digital world I didn't understand tear my son's creation to pieces. I saw it unfold in real time on the tablet Mrs. Gable had later helped me set up for just this purpose. The company's social media pages were flooded, not with the usual bland compliments, but with a torrent of fury. Fraud! Scam! You exploited your own father! The 5-star rating on his site plummeted to 1 star in a matter of hours, a digital avalanche of contempt. Then came the email alerts from his own customer service portal, a flood of red, angry subject lines. Refund, fraudulent misrepresentation, reporting to Better Business Bureau. I was a spectator to the implosion of a universe I had never wanted any part of. And with every new alert, every new outraged comment, I felt a piece of my name being chiseled back from the fake edifice he had built around it. The climax came that evening. The call. It wasn't a text this time. The phone screamed, the ringtone a shrill, panicked sound. I picked it up. The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was a raw, ragged thing, stripped of all its slick corporate polish. "What did you do?" he screamed. The sound was pure, undiluted panic. "Do you have any idea? They're pulling the orders. The suppliers are canceling. The credit card processors are freezing the accounts. You've ruined me. You've ruined everything." I let the silence hang for a moment after his outburst. Let him hear the empty, quiet truth of my world compared to the collapsing chaos of his. "No," I said, my voice calm, steady as heartwood. "I didn't ruin anything. I simply took my name back. You built your house on my foundation, but you built it with rotten timber. I just reminded the world what real wood looked like." There was a choked, strangled sound on the other end of the line. It was the sound of his entire worldview, of scalability, of branding, of the idea being more important than the thing itself, shattering against the unyielding rock of a simple, unforgiving truth. "You had no right," he whispered. The fight gone out of him, replaced by a hollow, bewildered hurt. "I had every right," I replied. "It was my name, my life. You thought it was an asset to be leveraged. I proved it was a legacy to be protected." He hung up. The dial tone was a flat, final sound. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within a month, it was over. The shiny company, Ellis Hine Furniture Co., was shuttered. The logos were peeled off the trucks, the website vanished into the digital ether, leaving behind only the ghost of its disgrace in cached search results and angry forum posts. The silence returned to my life. But it was different now. It was no longer the silence of the tomb. It was the silence after a storm, a clean, washed, peaceful quiet.
he still won't talk to me. Sometimes, in the deep of the night, I look at the photograph of him as a boy sitting on my knee in this very workshop, his small hand wrapped around my finger, and my heart aches with a loss so profound it feels like a physical emptiness in the room. I wish he would call. I wish he would come by. I wish he could see that the vengeance wasn't the point. The point was the restoration of a truth. But then I remember the day he looked at my hands, these old, scarred, honest hands, and told me I didn't understand the modern world. Maybe I don't. But I understand this much. A tree's strength comes from its roots deep in the honest earth. You can cut the branches, you can strip the bark, you can carve your initials into its heartwood. But if you sever it from where it came from, it will die. It might be polished and varnished and turned into a hollow imitation of itself for a little while, but it is dead nonetheless. My son forgot where he came from. He thought the ground of his father's honesty was just dirt to be built upon, and the ground, as it always does, found a way to remind him.
The weeks that followed the collapse were a study in quietude. The phone, which had been a nerve center of crisis, fell silent. The digital tempest I had watched on the tablet subsided, leaving behind a wreckage of bad reviews and abandoned web pages. The world, it seemed, had moved on to the next scandal. But in my house, in my workshop, the air was thick with the fallout of a different kind. There was no victory parade, no sense of triumphalism. The emotion that settled over me was heavier, more complex, a profound, weary relief marbled with veins of a grief that felt ancient. I had won. I had reclaimed my name. I had proven my point with the brutal efficiency of a falling tree, and I was utterly, completely alone with the spoils of that war. I would catch myself staring at the chair by the fireplace, the one my son had sat in as a boy, his legs too short to touch the floor, listening to me tell stories about the wood spirits that lived in the grain. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the hot chocolate his mother would bring us. Now the chair held only dust and absence. My days took on a new rhythm, one of deliberate, painful healing. I could no longer bear the stagnation of my workshop. The dust was a shroud, and I had to lift it. One morning, I didn't just sit at my bench. I picked up a rag and a bottle of mineral spirits, and I began to clean. I wiped away 2 years of neglect from the surface of my old cast-iron table saw, the black metal emerging from under the gray pall like a moon from behind clouds. The sharp, chemical smell was a baptism. Then I did the hardest thing. I walked to the corner where a stack of rough-sawn maple planks had been leaning, waiting for a project that never came. I selected a board. It was heavy, solid, real. I hefted it onto my bench, running my hand over the rough, bark-spattered edge. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend after a long estrangement. I wasn't planning a chair or a table. I had no design in mind. I simply needed to feel the process again, to reconnect with the liturgy of my craft. I picked up a hand plane, its rosewood handle polished smooth by decades of my grip. I set the blade, finding the sweet spot by muscle memory, and pushed. A thin, translucent curl of wood peeled away from the board, releasing the trapped scent of the forest, sweet, clean, and alive.
It was the first cut I'd made in 2 years. The sound was a whisper. The feeling was a homecoming. With each pass of the plane, the surface of the wood became smoother, the grain emerging like a secret being told. The pale, creamy heartwood, with its delicate, feathery patterns, was a map of a life I understood. This was my language. This was my truth. Each shaving that fell to the floor was a layer of the bitterness and hurt I had been carrying, sloughed away. I worked for an hour, maybe 2, losing myself in the simple, repetitive motion. The ache in my shoulders was a familiar pain, an honest one, earned by creation, not by decay. When I finally set the plane down and ran my palm over the silken surface I had revealed, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before my son had offered to take over. This was why I had fought. Not for money, not for reputation, but for the right to this quiet communion between my hands and a piece of the honest world. It was during this slow reawakening that the box arrived. It was a plain, brown cardboard cube left on my porch by a delivery driver. There was no return address. My name was written on the label in a handwriting I knew as well as my own, but it seemed shaky, uncertain. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Was this some final bitter token from him? A piece of his failed inventory? A letter full of renewed venom? I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time, as if it were a dormant animal that might stir. Finally, I took my pocket knife and slit the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled packing paper, wasn't a manufactured product. It was a jumble of wood. I lifted the pieces out, one by one, laying them on the table. They were the components of a small, simple box. The joints were dovetailed, or rather, they were an attempt at dovetailing. The pins and tails were uneven, gaps showed where the cuts had been inaccurate, and the surface was scarred with the harsh gouges of a chisel used without finesse. It was a child's first project, clumsy and raw, but it wasn't a child's. Tucked inside the unfinished box was a single, lined index card. On it, he had written just 4 words.
I'm trying to learn. The air left my lungs. I sank into a chair, the poorly cut piece of pine feeling heavier than any mahogany in my shop. This wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was something far more vulnerable, far more profound. It was a surrender. It was an admission. He was speaking my language for the first time in his life, and he was doing it badly, haltingly, with no skill but with a terrifying, nascent honesty. He was telling me that the ground had reminded him. I held the clumsy dovetail in my hand, my thumb tracing the rough, gap-filled joint. I saw his hands, the soft, manicured hands of a businessman struggling with the tools. I saw his frustration, his impatience, his failure. And I saw, in this pathetic, beautiful, broken little box, the first green shoot of something real pushing through the scorched earth. He still didn't call. He didn't visit. This box was his communication. It was all he could manage. And it was enough. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed, the deep gold of autumn giving way to the stark gray of winter. I continued my work in the shop, now with purpose. I was building a writing desk for Mrs. Gable to replace the particle board one that had failed her.
It was my thank you. One afternoon, with a light snow beginning to fall outside the window, I saw a figure standing at the edge of my property, at the beginning of the long driveway that led to my workshop. He was just a silhouette against the white, his coat collar turned up against the cold. He didn't approach, he didn't wave, he just stood there, for perhaps 5 minutes, looking at the workshop, at the plume of smoke from my stovepipe, at the light glowing from within. I didn't go out. I didn't raise a hand. I simply stood at the window, allowing him to look, allowing him to see that the workshop was alive again, that I was alive again, that the legacy he had tried to commodify was still here, waiting, not in a brand, but in the steady hand and the patient heart. After a while, he turned and walked away, his footprints a solitary trail in the fresh snow.
He still won't talk to me. And maybe he never will. Not in the way I once hoped. The damage was too deep. The humiliation too public. The lesson too hard. The bridge between our worlds wasn't burned. It was revealed to have never been properly built in the first place. He had been raised in my house, but he had not been raised in my world. Until now. Now I understand that my revenge was never about breaking him. It was about breaking the lie he was living. The karmic justice wasn't in his company's failure. It was in the forced return to the simplest of truths. You cannot build anything lasting on a foundation of deception. You must start with raw, honest material, and you must respect its nature. Sometimes the most profound lessons are not taught, but carved. I carved mine with the chisel of public truth, and the shape it revealed was the son I never knew was hiding inside the businessman. A son who is now slowly, painfully, trying to learn how to join two pieces of wood together. Maybe one day he will come up the driveway. Maybe one day he will open the door and stand in this shop not as a stranger, but as an apprentice. Maybe he will ask me how to fix the gaps in his dovetails. And if he does, I will show him, not with a lecture on business, but with the quiet patience of a craftsman, the slow, sure knowledge that the wood and the hands together can teach a man everything he needs to know about honesty, resilience, and the quiet, unyielding power of a legacy that is earned, not branded. The silence now is not empty. It is full of potential. It is the sound of a man at peace with his work, and the distant, fragile hope of a son finding his way home. What is a legacy but a story we leave behind? Some are written in ledgers, others in law books. Mine is written in the grain of the wood, in the silent, sturdy witness of the tables and chairs that will outlive me. What story does your own work tell? Share your thoughts on the true meaning of a legacy in the comments below.